You see anything?
Darkness. You afraid? I'm not. The dark is afraid of me.
Over the years, I've mentioned the Riddick games a handful of times. I thought of them the most playing through Callisto Protocol since there was so much lost potential there for a space prison game. But playing The Thing Remastered had me thinking about it again. It's one of the truly great and unique movie licensed games. Only issue is, if you don't have it on console, holy shit is this thing a bear to get running. And there are layers to this because there are 3 different versions of Butcher's Bay, and each one has its own special quirks. So let's go through all that first. Original Xbox version. You need the console. It was also a game really pushing graphical fidelity, so it might not run the best. It also won't look as good as it could, but it is plug and play if you have all the materials. Which brings us to the PC version called the Developer's Cut, and my hell. Even if you bought this back in the day, it came with Securom. This is sort of like a Balrog for DRM nowadays, except in this case the Balrog was locked away for shitting its pants in class too much. GOG did re-release it without it, but licenses expired at the time of the Maybe you bought it before that, or have your own copy, or found a version floating around. That's nice, but now comes the checklist of broken things. Like if you try to play above 1080, the game will start zooming into the corner. The higher the resolution, the bigger the zoom. I did look into ways you could do monitor upscaling and all these tricks to technically make it go up, but this is a problem at an engine level. Plus I didn't want my footage looking weird, but this is all at 1080. Still looks good. Okay, now does your movement look jittery and weird? Like Vin Diesel's being bitten by rats nonstop? Well, ironically, it's due to your mouse, and you need to set the refresh rate lower. I repeat, your mouse can fuck this game up if it's above 125. Fear is another game with this kind of thing. Movement now looks normal. We can check that off. Actually, you might be done. The aliasing can be rough, but you can enable it in the console, which you do by adding this line to the environment configuration folder. You Control Alt-Tilde, add this line, hit enter, and you're good to go, as long as it doesn't crash when you do that. Also, you have to open the console, hit the up arrow, and hit enter every time you restart the game. You can also add an EAX sound if you have the tools for that, but when you get to this part, you might see things start to flicker. We're not done yet. This issue has been blamed on new RTX GPUs, AMD GPUs, but I've found forum posts from 2005 complaining about it, so it's always been around in some form. The problem is having your shaders set to max at 2.0++, the shaders for the future. The main difference is that instead of hardline stencil shadows, you get soft shadows. It's not a huge visual difference, but the game does run noticeably worse with it on. There is a patch in the PC Gaming Wiki, which I've been using for this. It's worth installing if you have crashing problems, but on my end, it didn't fix the night vision flickering. So you can put all of this under an umbrella of it depends. But if you do all that, you'll have a mostly stable, great looking and sounding game. It's pretty nuts for an original Xbox port.
We're moving again. They just transmitted a safe route through the minefield.
That minefield's offering better odds than you're gonna get taking me to Butcher Bay.
It's visually gritty, moody, and extremely atmospheric. Plus it has new gameplay sections not on Xbox, and a Half-Life 2 style commentary mode. All great additions, but remember, there's a third option. The Butcher Bay Remaster, made for the Xbox 360 in 2009, and included in Dark Athena. The sequel game just has this bundled with it, and it's on PC as well. Porting the game to an upgraded engine sounds great, until you see what they've done to it.
They just transmitted a safe route through the minefield.
That minefield's offering better odds than you're gonna get taking me to Butcher Bay.
There are technical improvements, like lip syncing was a huge one, but the look and feel of the game is completely changed. It's just drowning in color correction, bloom, and post-processing. Everything became washed out and over-brightened at the same time. For reference, the sequel takes place on a creepy spaceship, and now the prison looks like a creepy spaceship. And beyond the art shift, a lot of details were changed or lost, and I could notice a bunch right from the opening.
The Riddick?
Get the fuck back to your cell, Jack.
Hey, Riddick.
Hey, Riddick!
Wes is gonna eat you
You just landed in Gladiator
I'm
School.
Barber. Come talk to me after delousing, okay?
This is your home.
The Riddick?
Get the fuck back to your cell, Jack.
Hey, Riddick! You just landed.
Riddick, I'm Barber. Come talk to me after delousing, okay?
This is your home.
The trade-offs aren't worth it to me. Like, gunplay is better, but it's not a pure FPS all the way through. Mechanics like melee combat were overhauled to be more reliable, but have less depth to them. Some sticking points like climbing are a lot more reliable this time around, which is a big plus. But then enemy detection AI feels a lot worse in areas, and on PC, it still has its own different set of quirks to get running. Some old bugs were fixed, some new ones showed up. Ultimately though, they took grungy prison assets and replaced some with those meant for a spaceship, and it just doesn't look cohesive. Yeah, it's a pain right now, I've put feelers out about that, but the second best option, I can't do it.
I said, you're in my cell.
Yeah, it is a ridiculous situation, but it is a game that deserves the spotlight. Really, the entire franchise is endlessly interesting to me. Luckily, Butcher Bay is a prequel, so you don't need to have seen any of the movies or the comics or anything else really, but I'll still lay down some groundwork. Riddick first appears in the movie Pitch Black, which is about a commercial spaceship crash landing on a planet, and Riddick is just one of the survivors.
Richard B. Riddick, escaped convict, murderer.
That's a particularly good Shiraz. It's just a lovely drop. It's very expensive.
He had just broken out of a high-security prison, but was captured by Johns, a bounty hunter. Johns intends to take him right back to one, both for the money and because they have a history. In fact, in the start of Butcher Bay, it's Johns taking him there, and even at this point, they've known each other a while. This is because Riddick is basically a walking shank. In Vin Diesel terms, he's a drow Gloomstalker ranger. He has exceptional dark vision, but in normal light, he needs welding goggles to help tolerate it, because he got his eyes modified in a sunless prison.
You take up a doctor, and you pay him 20 menthol cools to do a surgical shine job on your eyeballs.
So you can see who's sneaking up on you in the dark.
Exactly.
So by the time of the movie, he seems to have tossed out most of his humanity. He's physically modified to dwell in the abyss, hunt down others, and say 2000s one-liners. He's extremely perceptive. Pitch Black explores the group needing him to be their eyes, but it's also about what he saw in them before the lights went out, and what he couldn't see. It's a genuinely great and self-contained movie, a nice creature feature very focused on its characters. In the sequel, an empire of death-worshipping space crusaders are about to wipe out all life in the universe. That is a hell of a jump to make. The story wasn't as strong and definitely lacked focus, but it introduced a really interesting sci-fi setting, and Riddick gets to run around in it.
I'll kill you with my teacup.
These movies can have what looks like a modern cop in a ball cap, and then a city called New Mecca, or Wolverine is trying to kill Riddick, or Linoge is back to haunt my nightmares with his 40k homebrew faction. It's Space Conan, and I love that. The downside is, they did start to make him the Chosen One, and there was some retconning that this game actually makes explanations for. The third movie did have some cool stuff as well, but also a lot of, let's do Pitch Black again. So when we get into the story, I'll talk about the movies more, or else I'd have a lot less to say on the plot. Because otherwise, it's a very straightforward game, and the parts I find the most interesting do need the movies for context. Also, the game came out a week before the Chronicles of Riddick movie, so beyond being a marketing tie-in game, it had threads to follow in there. Okay, so as for the plot, Johns drops off Riddick at Butcher Bay. It's really that simple, but I'll go over a little more.
It ain't the fall that gets you.
The opening cutscene is actually right before Chronicles of Riddick starts. He's in self-exile on a snow planet fighting a Section 8 Wampa. I won't go too much into Chronicles of Riddick here. But he's haunted by the voice of some kind of ancestor spirit, lamenting that he can use his gifts so well, but there's such a dark soul behind his eyes.
These are a courtesy of a slam preacher. Got him a long time ago. Cost me 20 menthols.
Interesting how one chooses to remember the past.
So he's actively in denial of his Chosen One status, which I do support him on that.
You cannot escape your destiny.
I can escape anything.
Like Butcher Bay.
Butcher Bay. Johns.
Okay, and that's that. Johns finally has Riddick locked away in the pacifier Torment Throne, but at some point in the past, Johns crossed the warden of Butcher Bay, Hoxie. Now, we never learn exactly what happened between Hoxie and Johns, but since Hoxie looks like a cross between Shrek 2's Prince Charming and a South American dictator, it could have been petty. Either way, the opening establishes some cool mechanics you're in for, like dialogue options.
Today, Johns, you get fucked.
And stealth kills because Johns turns his back on Riddick, but you won't be grabbing his weapon.
DNA protection. New meat learns the hard way.
You're introduced to the melee system, hiding bodies, climbing, and a few helpful concepts like using health stations, and not all guns are DNA protected. All the way through, Vin Diesel guides you along your way.
Locked. Not a problem. I'll blast it off.
This is the most he narrates the whole game, but it's interesting because it wasn't always this way. Like, he still has thoughts during key moments, and the tutorial being the most narrative heavy makes sense. But if you look into any Riddick project, you'll find out that Vin Diesel had a ton of input into the character. Arguably the best shot in Pitch Black was Vin Diesel's idea.
Crikey. I thought it was him. I thought it was Riddick.
For Butcher Bay, he wanted less lines than what they had written for him. So when he does speak to himself, it seems way more deliberate and reflective, like he's been snapped out of survival mode to think about something deeper. And then other times, it's more tutorial-style help.
Locked. Need to calm the hacks into opening it.
Sure, the man could read a phone book and would probably be entertaining, but what's important is that the restriction made it so it's never grating. A silly one-liner is a treat you get every once in a while, instead of something you endure every 30 seconds.
I played the hand that was dealt. And then I cheat.
Beyond introducing all the game's concepts, it's good characterization. By the end, you kind of get what he's like as far as edgelords go. There's plenty of room left to add more to him, and then they taper his lines off appropriately.
A med station takes away the hurt, leaves the pain.
Which makes it fine that the opening is all a dream, or at least the escape attempt part. You've learned how to play the game, Riddick has clear motivation, and the story's pacing is still intact. Like I said before, Riddick goes to prison.
So the famous Mr. Riddick.
Escape Butcher Bay, outwit Hawks, and exhibit?
Remember the rules. My rules.
All we need now is Ja Rule, and Riddick is for sure getting 25 to life. Anyways, let's talk about the look of the game. Butcher Bay, the actual prison, is a concrete nightmare. A triple max security facility. The planet is a desert wasteland, and the prison itself is built over an endless abyss. Inmates in the lower levels can participate in the prison's mining operations, which at least gives you something to do until you crack into a hole the local wildlife is living in. But honestly, most of the time, it's hard to tell you're living in scared straight Arrakis at all. The guards might get a frequent peek at the scenic hellscape, but you're mainly here to rot in a cell. No one escapes Butcher Bay, and the guards especially know this. Most of General Pop is a rotting, graffiti-covered zoo. An entire wing of it has basically been surrendered to a gang, but in reality, it's not going to go too far outside of how Exhibit wants things run. It's another method of control the guards can use without having to bother being there themselves. If they see violations, they might come down to beat someone down for fun, including you, but otherwise, max security is a place of pure apathy. What makes it interesting is that there are sci-fi elements, but this is a prison first and foremost. You're not held in by force fields, just concrete and metal. Visually, everything looks like it was built to last. All the machinery and computers are huge and bulky. Even something more fantastical like the power armor still looks clumsy and dated. Like they're not top-of-the-line machines, but for riot control, they'll get the job done. And they'll probably run forever if you have the parts to repair them. Everything you see was meant to be thrown here and endure the rot. Sure, it's a future space prison colony, but visually, it looks so grounded. However, the deeper you go into the prison, the more things will start to change up. It goes from a rundown San Quentin to what could be a circle of hell. The mining operation, which Butcher Bay actually has an interest in running smoothly, still has a surface look of being a free-for-all, but if you look, there are cameras everywhere. It still looks like General Pop to the newcomers, but it is not the same structure. And along the way, you're starting to see more of the sci-fi technology this setting has. You're not sure how far it'll go until you hit triple max security near the end of the game. Which I won't show yet, but it's a hell of a shakeup compared to everything else. It's such a great mix of high tech and low life. Even at the end, it doesn't twist things too far off. You might see a laser, but the elaborate metal doors break down sometimes. There are nanotech healing stations, but a guard might have a toll for one. There can be enough cameras to make George Orwell uncomfortable, the guards still know a blind spot. There are so many extra details to making it feel lived in. There's such a pristine layer of stains and grime to everything. Like, within about 5 minutes of arrival, it's clear Riddick won't be content raiding the commissary and making Ziploc McFlurries. And this is before he's seen Double Max. What brings it all together is the game's lighting system. Beyond just, looking sharp, seeing as Riddick's superpower is being able to see in the dark, light and shadow being a huge focus makes complete sense. He may have cool one-liners, but he's not immune to bullets. It's not much of a gunfight if you don't have one too, and trying to run in straight forward will get you killed. So instead you stick to the shadows, don't get caught, and find a way around. There is some thief DNA here, and while sound isn't nearly as important, it's still present to a degree. For example, a stealth kill isn't a one-button option, you have two. A longer kill, that stays quieter, or the express option.
Nothing here.
The game does have enough climbing mechanics to where sound surfaces could have worked, but it's not a pure stealth game, and a lot of times, stealth is just an option. Still, I love how the game looks. The engine may be finicky, but it still feels like id Tech 3's cool cousin. The levels of darkness the game can get to can be extreme, but what's neat is how controllable it can be, and the fact that eyeshine isn't a perfect solution. Even before you have eyeshine, you can still take out lights to have an advantage. If anyone does come into the light, you already have the drop on them. You might think being able to see in the dark would only make this better, but remember, Riddick is also light sensitive. You can still prep an area to be stealthier, but when the shooting starts, you're disoriented by the muzzle flares and flashlights. You're at your best killing quietly in the dark. The fact your weapon spread isn't great kind of works for the character too. He can use guns, but he's not about guns. A firefight happening in the dark is things not going his way, so it looks disorienting. When it shifts back to melee combat, now you're in his world. And Vin Diesel never needs to say, "Oof, ow, my eyes," this is all informed through gameplay. It would have been easy to forgo the movies and make him a perfect predator in darkness, but instead it's still a trade-off he has weaknesses in. Besides, you could just use a flashlight, but that puts you on an even playing field. Also, I love the menu cube. I don't know why it's a cube, but I do miss when games would have absolutely wild menus like this. Maybe it's to reinforce being trapped in a box or a homage to another cool movie. Whatever the reason, it can be clunky, but it sure is memorable. Also, don't watch the Japanese version of Cube. Oh my god. The game has great character models and animation, though the lip syncing can be wonky sometimes, but it's still crazy to think that this came out on the original Xbox. It has some fantastic graphical technology on display, but as for the audio, it's also great. There are lots of layered ambient effects, the weapons and sci-fi gizmos sound unique, and the actual sound propagation technology is good too.
You jerk offs, get me out of here!
Get you out of there? After you apologize.
The music is good too, but I wish there were more combat tracks. There's a good amount of the sneaking and tension songs, and they have little flourishes of the action tracks in them. I think it's that most of the combat music sounds like adventure music.
Come on, prisoner! Give up!
It's not bad at all, but there are absolutely some sections where it doesn't feel fitting. And like many movie licensed games, not being able to use any movie music is a real shame. Not having any stinger with the horns is such a lost opportunity. It does the job. Voice acting is a big standout. Everyone from the movie reprises their roles, there's excellent direction. The game is loaded with pro voice actors and Hollywood actors, which was still highly unusual for back then.
And I'm not even going to ask you how you handle those hacks.
The one sticking point is that sometimes Vin Diesel gets right up on the microphone.
But how do I know you're not a simple imposter?
Can you stitch me or not?
You're Riddick, huh? I'm Jagger Valance. Perhaps you've heard of me.
I'm not a very good listener. Where's the spaceport?
My headcanon for this is that he learned mic technique while working on the Iron Giant, and it wouldn't be until later that he unlearned some things.
What you currently have in your mouth is art!
Fuck.
When it comes to living in and escaping prison, there are a few interesting systems at play, with the first you'll likely run into being melee combat. It can look janky, because it is, but it's an interesting control scheme. Basically, the direction of your movement will affect the direction of your swings, kind of like later Elder Scrolls games, I guess. The difference is every swing counts, not just power attacks, and you can also land combos. You do this by tapping a direction at the same time you hit an attack. Of course, getting the combo in means dodging or blocking until that window opens up, and that can be a small window. Plus, you're also keeping your eyes open for performing a counter, which you can do right before an enemy hits you. The timing for these is extremely precise, and you only know you can do it when Riddick opens his hands. This typically happens outside your line of sight, so from your perspective, Riddick's hands just vanish. Weirdly enough, this is way easier to do on enemies with a weapon, and especially a gun, because their swings are so much more telegraphed. So if you're not zoned out by gunfire, then getting in close is your best bet. You can find all kinds of melee weapons too, like knuckle dusters, clubs, all kinds of shivs. But really, they all feel equally brutal. Melee combat is fast and meaty. Sometimes your counters are so fast that you're not even sure you did one until Paul Blart drops dead. The problems come from enemies clipping into you, or their AI acting weird, or things not lining up correctly, and the system itself can just be tricky. Being able to see Riddick's whole body and legs when you look down doesn't feel like it was put there just for immersion, but also because there's a kind of full body awareness to the combat. It does feel close to something like Condemned Criminal Origins, but that came out over a year later and was done better. I was never completely comfortable with it, which does make the fights tense, but when you deal with a damage sponge in something like the Exhibit boss fight, then it gets tedious. But when you get in the flow and it all comes together, the sheer brutality becomes pure spectacle. How the blood sprays around definitely makes it more visceral. Though strangely, like Condemned, you also get an overpowered taser, but even stronger because it's an electric dart gun. Though at the very least, you don't get it until a good ways into the game. Plus, while there are weapons-free areas, a lot are being monitored. And if you're seen holding any extracurricular items, they'll put you down. The game really plays with how much freedom you're allowed in any section, so weapons will come and go and you're never 100% sure how much power you've gained will stay. Still, at a baseline the melee is fun and unique, just tricky to master. Dark Athena's take is much easier, but for the Butcher Bay levels, it doesn't carry the same sense of tension. It feels like you auto-counter kill them when you whittle their health down, and while it looks a lot smoother, it doesn't have the same physical weight to it. It makes way more sense in its own campaign, just not the prison. Now, being in prison, Riddick can't always go on a murder spree, but he can sometimes. There are occasions where a straight-up fight is the only way forward, but sometimes there are subtler ways through. What keeps things interesting is how the game mixes the options up. Sure, at baseline you could be Murder Man or go through something sneaky-beaky, but it's the context around that. Like when you're making your way out of max security, you could gun down everyone in sight. It'll be a hard fight, but it is a valid option. You could stick to the shadows and sneak your way through, or find a disguise. And doing this opens up a lot of little guard interactions.
You seen him?
Nah, I just heard what he looks like. Kinda like that guy.
Right. Okay.
You can buy weapons and armor to store at your way to hunt down Exhibit. Then you could scope out a few possible ways to get into his apartment. And on the way, you could cut the power in areas and take down a few more guards. The level design isn't as open or interconnected as a proper immersive sim, but there are absolutely sections in that spirit that give you the choice in how to proceed. You can skip out on a lot, like when you get to Double Max. This is an area where you're trying to get in trouble, but in the right way. You could be caught with G-Smack, which the prisoners make by catching moths. There's something hallucinogenic in them that gets you nice and high. Or you can win some fights in the arena, which the guards and prisoners participate in. Once you're in the circle, there are no rules except you can't leave the circle, which means you can smuggle some weapons in. There's an entire little world of side quests you can do down here, like finding out who's snitching to the guards, killing rival gang members, poisoning someone to speed up a ransom process. Or you could ignore all of that and take your luck on craps. But you would not believe how bad the losing streaks can be here.
It's nothing. You lose, man.
It's all mainly optional, but worth engaging in. Sure, a weapon helps in the arena, but buying a vent tool lets you crawl around where you couldn't otherwise. Not to mention the side quests can be pretty ruthless. Like, you could be told to kill all members of a gang, but they might not be hostile to you. I mean, they are in Butcher Bay. They probably did something fucked up, right? Oh, the Earthrockers are here, too. One little detail I like in these sections is that every NPC, guard or prisoner, has a name. They don't go, oh, these are the prisoners you're supposed to sympathize with, and these are the faceless guards. It gives humanity to both of them, but also kind of reinforces they're both the same kind of scum in different situations. They may be on different levels of the totem pole, but something went wrong in your life to end up here. Whether you're employed or an inmate, you're still in the prison.
Butcher's is really falling apart. No one cares. Not Hoxie or the Barnes. Everyone's either addicts or gun crazy. Or dead.
Voice actors are reused a lot, which does make that part trickier to get into. In Scholars' terms, this game is for John DiMaggio what Quake 4 is for Steve Bloom.
Holy cow! I think you survived the fall.
But when you forget all that and gun everything down, it's still fun. They keep the HUD minimal the whole time as well. Your health will only display if you're wounded, and most guns have ammo counters right on them. It only displays your backup mags when you reload or when you find more ammo. Firearms are fun, with good sound effects and great visual feedback on the enemies. Though, in another strange reminder of id Tech 3 and Doom 3, the shotgun might as well be a melee weapon. The range and spread is that bad. It almost feels like it was designed entirely around a single level below the prison. That's where you fight the swarms of mutants who either got irradiated through some kind of mining runoff, or maybe they couldn't handle the grits and black bean specials anymore. Anyways, while you can go loud, it does seem more fun to play more slowly and sneaky. Beyond the gameplay advantage stuff you find, the collectibles are worth seeking out. There's lots of bonus content to unlock about the game and the setting in the main menu, though I don't recommend reading a novelization through The Cube. But hey, they have a G4 documentary. That's another blast from the past.
I try to kick as much ass as I can with what little I have.
But maybe you don't care about this stupid setting. It's still worth it for the cigarette pack covers. These things are ahead of their time. I went looking for them more to see where the line was drawn. I've never gotten all of them since some are like Halo skulls, but they're weird enough to be a good collectible. There's always something to find. That's one of the goblins from Starbreeze's other game, Enclave, which you saw bits of in... I'll never escape it.
One of the great things about Enclave is that it just had a really great visual look to it.
I know a studio who agreed to that. Oh, it's you. Right, getting back on track. All the pieces are here for an amazing game, and it is great, but the biggest issue is the polish. Sometimes the game will bug out and you can't pick up an item or gun properly. There are plenty of visual bugs, like models snapping into the wrong animation or whatever the fuck is happening there. But beyond all the visual glitches, the AI is a big one. Like on the stealth side, how they detect you isn't very consistent. Sometimes they sniff you out from across the room, or if you're in the disguise section, suddenly they realize you're the guy they're looking for. It is one of those games where the stealth bullshit goes both ways. I could horribly mess up a drop takedown, but he doesn't notice me and I still get him. Or they can find a body you left and start shooting where you're at 5 seconds later. Even in combat, there were times an enemy forgot I existed and just wandered off into the hallways, or just stopped fighting me and stood there for some reason. When the systems work, they work, but this still happens often enough to be distracting. There are some things you could argue are happening in setting, like a guard realizing who you are suddenly, but most of the time, it's just overtly broken. This is another area Dark Athena kind of improved on, but also has its own different set of problems. All the pieces are here, but it feels like some needed more time in the oven. All that said, I think that just leaves the story, and as I said before, the tale of Dickie Rick's escape is extremely straightforward. Even without any movie knowledge, it's still a satisfying arc. But I do want to go into some of that, so if you don't want spoilers, go to here. In Riddick's attempt to escape max security, he falls down into the Gimp sewers and has to blast his way out. While down there, he meets Pope Joe, a character who was apparently cut from the movie. Since Riddick was wounded in the fall, Joe will only heal him up if he brings him his voice box, which ends up being like a cross between a CIA numbers station and country radio. It says a lot of bizarre things, but mainly foreshadows necromongers.
The Lord says these are ministries, planetary ministries, system-wide ministries.
As Joe fixes his arm, a voice tells Riddick he's been blind for too long, and he gets his eye shine. Why the scene plays out this way is weird to me for a few reasons. For one, the game is pre-pitch black, but this is foreshadowing for Chronicles, which is fine planting even if it doesn't pay off here, but it's not the only instance of it. The second is that Riddick blames Pope Joe for doing something to his eyes. Like they're trying to have ambiguity to it, but it's clear that it just sort of happened. It feels like it would make more sense if Riddick was knocked out while he was doing this, and Joe could vaguely allude to how else he'll help him. It would make it way easier for him to write off the visions and voices as a medical fever dream. Besides, it's important to learn that the voices are not on your side. And truth be told, I've always hated the Threatcon being it's a fury and power he has. It's been scrapped forever, but Pitch Black had a prequel comic called Slam City, and you see him straight up trade for the eyeshine. The big difference is choice. In one, he throws a large part of his humanity away so he can thrive as some kind of abyss killer. His natural, most comfortable space will be in darkness. Instead, this would be like if I went in for a prostate exam and then entered the Avatar state. He shot Gimps in a sewer and found his radio, unless the words about necromongers triggered his fury and ancestry or something. It's a really interesting part of his character that was overwritten to make him a chosen one, and him misremembering or being in denial about it doesn't add much. There's a similar bit later when Exhibit catches you in Double Max, and I don't know what to call this, the Diesel Blast? No, that doesn't sound good. and then you club each other to death. In the context of a video game, it feels like you've unlocked a new power or ability, just like you did with the Eye Shine. Instead, this is never followed up on, and not in the movie either, unless you see the director's cut. There you see him do the exact same thing, unleashing fury and energy, and then it's never brought up again. In general, there's a lot more scenes of Furians being an overtly magical race, and I prefer Riddick being scary due to his experience. He never needed space magic with bioraptors.
Did not know who was fucking with.
Plus, he really seems at his best playing off of other characters, and especially a group. That's why this being a game works so well. There are people to play off of, and you get to play as Shivman in his natural habitat. Still, it is wild a game went this far to explain a retcon. At least back then. Anyhow, part of what's great about Pitch Black is how much it reveals about everybody. Who is Riddick or Fry or Johns or Imam when they're really being tested? The lights go out, but a lot more is revealed. Cool stuff. Butcher Bay mainly gives insight into Riddick and John's relationship. Johns foils one of his escape attempts, Riddick thanks him with a shank, and it kind of goes along with the prisoner and guard dynamic where they're not really that different, at least at this point. On top of that, Johns wants his bounty, Riddick wants out, but this still might be the closest thing to a friend Riddick might have had? It's a tense one if it is.
You dying on me, Johns?
No, not yet. They get you good?
I've had worse.
I thought this was going to be the day, Riddick. The day one of us kills the other.
The day is not over yet.
It also seems like he might not be tweaking on morphine yet. Eventually, John betrays Hoxie, saying he'll take Riddick to another slam, but it still seems kind of tongue-in-cheek, like they've been playing this cat-and-mouse game a while, or it's a borderline scam. Johns knows he can get out and he'll get a higher bounty each time. There's mutual respect here. By the time of Pitch Black, that's mainly evaporated. The reason for this is in a DVD extra for Pitch Black.
I would have never guessed he had such a soft spot in his little heart. Children in peril.
I don't know if they ever said what exactly he did, but he later cooked up another plan to feed a child to monsters, and that was the final straw. It's interesting to see glimpses of how things were before they got really bad, but Hoxie remains a mystery. You're not told much directly about him, but you still get a good sense of what he's about. Like, him being the prison warden makes him an automatic enemy, but when you see his wood floor penthouse on the top of the prison, that says everything. There are several points he could have easily wasted Riddick, but his pride won't let him because he's too used to being God in this little world. He's not just an inmate, he's a zoo animal, a trophy.
Nobody steals my property from my house, Johns.
He can lose guards all day, they're replaceable, it's the prestige of his facility. Though most of it has been actively crumbling under him, he never looked at it that closely to care. This edgelord in welding goggles isn't a real threat. He's annoying and a bit amusing. That only changes after Riddick sets off a bomb and lets swarms of aliens in. They do get contained, but at a massive cost to the mining operation. It's only at this point that Hoxie sends Riddick to the fabled Triple Max, and Johns is being blamed for bringing him here at all. He's done enough damage that this does feel like sabotage. At this point, you've already seen how dark, dirty, and awful things can get, so how foul is Triple Max?
Your mandatory 2 minutes of daily exercise begins now. This is your right as a guild prisoner, and your only right. A proposition to abolish law number 88432-337B is currently pending.
It's cryo-sleep, but you're woken up 2 minutes a day to do exercise, and even that right is being challenged. This doesn't seem too bad at first, until it sinks in. Your entire life is waking up, stumbling around for about a minute, and then collapsing back down until you die. It's 2 minutes of the same thing forever without real sleep, it just feels like the moment passes immediately. They'll play bird sounds and sometimes dump another prisoner in there, but this is life now. It's a torture nexus they painted white and added some on-paper niceties to. It sucks! Triple Max is no good. You do find a fairly obvious flaw to get out of it, and maybe other prisoners did too, but that doesn't mean you're out yet. Of course, the cryo coffin pyramids, and it's full of modern power armor and robots. This entire section has bizarre, completely new enemies.
Attention. Unscheduled presence reported. Please investigate immediately. Attention. Unscheduled presence reported.
At this point, you've gotten used to grime and prison drabness. Now you're in a bright, strangely colored, high-tech lab. Everything is pristine and sterile. Riddick's completely out of his element, and as the player, you are too. There are barely any dark corners to hide in, most of your enemies aren't humans anymore, and everything being bathed in artificial light is the exact opposite of where Riddick should be. There we go. It's a great shift from before, and you can stick it to Hoxie directly. You get to hijack a security mech and completely rip the upper levels of Butcher Bay apart. And all the while it just spews out first-time user tips and advertisements for the company's other products.
Analysis suggestion. Conserve ammunition. Unlocking over multiple targets around corner.
You're ruining the areas Hoxie actually cares about. One of his cryo trophies got loose. Weirdly, there's a similar villain in Riddick Dark Fury, except instead of cryo, her prisoners are in a different kind of suspended animation. They experience time extremely slowly, another kind of nightmare. That one's neat, but there's a lot of off-model scenes, like they did Keith David dirty in some shots. And then it culminates in the Battle of Off-Model. Like the game, the anime was also made to promote Chronicles, and also kept its cast from the previous movie. This was a huge push back then. Moving on, the final battle isn't against Hawks directly, but as security droids. They have a nice parallel, but only in the PC version. There's a section where you fight two robots called Flamingos, and they're machines using absolutely the bare minimum. They're gangly, awkward limbs barely managing the massive guns on top of them. The ones here are obviously more advanced, but they also look like works of art. But even though they have better guns and can cloak, they're just as ineffective. Using them at all directly leads to Hoxie getting ripped out of his hiding spot. When it's just him alone, he's got no leverage.
Can you walk, Johns?
Yeah, I think so.
How's your eyesight?
Riddick's the one wearing the goggles. Kill him on sight. That's him! Fire!
Butcher Bay escaped, more teasing about Riddick's destiny, but beyond the movie, maybe there will be a game where he fights necromongers. That makes perfect sense, right? Well, after the movie, the next game is another prequel. Still, outside Lord of the Rings and a few others, this is one of the best movie-licensed games. It does have some issues, but at the time of this video, the biggest one is getting it and getting it running. However, GOG recently launched the Dream List, where players can vote on what titles they prioritize restoring, and so I'll link that in the pinned comment. From what I understand, it was pulled originally due to some licenses expiring, but it does need some fixes as well. That about does it for this round, but come back soon for part 2. The Vin Diesel adventures aren't over yet.
It's a sudden stop at the bottom.
In RPGs, what class do I lean towards? If you mean tabletop, I'll play all kinds of classes, but I usually steer away from magic, which I think is leftover just trauma from D&D 3.5. It depends on the system, but for video games, I will play magic classes, if the magic is fun and interesting like Arcanum or Tyranny. Otherwise, I'm making default human fighter, and I always will. Will I cover the new Factorio DLC? I'm already behind schedule, man, like, not yet. Will there be a video on the Callisto Protocol's DLC ending? I have played through that, and it would be a shorter turnaround, so maybe if people are interested. I'm not sure if people still are. Have I ever played a game that reflected my entire personality? I don't think so, but the most recent one where everything clicked was Northern Journey. That's one I wish I could play for the first time again. Now that I have an industry job, any thoughts on the current state? Funny enough, nothing new really, just different insights into it. There's still talented people trying to make great things, but the landscape is kind of a nightmare. Hopefully, things will look up. But beyond that, I guess I can have horse news sometimes. We put out Heart of the Machine last week, which is a 4X RPG from the creator of AI War Fleet Command. Truth be told, I've worked on this game and can't describe it concisely, so that's how things are going there.